Hello, and welcome to Byline of Time, where we present interesting historical happenings. Today we present the Great Molasses Flood. On a cold January day in 1919, Boston was swallowed by a wave of molasses. Not water, not lava, but molasses. A 15-foot wall of syrup tore through the city's north end, flattening buildings, tossing train cars, and sweeping horses, and people alike in a thick brown tide. It sounds ridiculous, even funny. But it wasn't. It was horrific. This is the true story of how one company's negligence and a few simple laws of physics turned Boston into a sticky, slow-motion nightmare. At the start of the 20th century, molasses was big business. It wasn't just for cookies or candy. It was used to make industrial alcohol for munitions, cleaning products, and even fuel. During World War I, demand for that alcohol skyrocketed. And in Boston's North End, a dense, immigrant-heavy neighborhood squeezed between the harbor and the factories, the Purity Distilling Company built something enormous to cash in. A storage tank, 50 feet high, 90 feet wide, big enough to hold 2.3 million gallons of molasses fresh from the Caribbean. It loomed over the neighborhood like a giant rusted silo, just a block from homes, a firehouse, and the elevated train tracks. Locals said the tank groaned when it was full, leaked constantly. Children even brought cups to collect the drips. Everyone knew it leaked. Everyone could see it. But management painted it brown to hide the stains and ignored the warning signs. The tank had been rushed from the start, built in 1915 by an engineer with no formal training. No safety tests, no proper inspections. Never even filled with water to check for leaks before being loaded with thousands of tons of syrup. And the steel? It was thin, half as thick as it should have been, and too brittle for cold weather. Every time the tank was filled, the rivets strained a little more. By January in 1919, the war was over, but the company had one last big shipment to unload, and they were racing against time. Prohibition was just days away, and the U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company, Purity's parent company, wanted to turn as much molasses into alcohol as possible before the new law kicked in. On January 14th, workers pumped in another load of warm molasses from a ship in the harbor. Inside the tank, it mixed with the older, colder syrup that had been sitting for months. That combination, heat, fermentation gas, and pressure, built up like a ticking bomb. Then came the weather. The next morning, the temperature rose rapidly, from near freezing to over 40 degrees. The steel expanded, the molasses thinned, and the tank began to moan. At about 12:30 p.m., the tank finally gave out. Witnesses heard what sounded like a machine gun, rivets popping in rapid fire. Then came a deep rolling roar like thunder echoing off the harbor. A seam split open. The entire side of the tank blew out. 2.5 million gallons of molasses exploded into the streets of Boston. The sugary wave was 25 feet high and moving at more than 30 miles per hour. A tsunami of syrup, dense, dark, and unstoppable. It tore through buildings, ripped them off their foundations, twisted train tracks, and swept away everything in its path. People and horses were swallowed in seconds. For a few minutes, the North End became an alien landscape. Everything was brown. The air smelled sweet but sickening, like burnt sugar and iron. The molasses was waist-deep in places, hardening as it cooled in the winter air. Rescue workers who arrived minutes later found themselves trapped too. Boots stuck, hands glued. Firefighters' horses couldn't pull their wagons through it. Some crawled on their stomachs to avoid sinking. The scene was chaos. People screamed from inside collapsed buildings. One firehouse was crushed flat. Inside, firefighters used ladders as bridges across the syrup, saving a few, but several men were entombed before help could reach them. By the time the flow finally stopped, the damage was unthinkable. 21 people were dead. Over 150 were injured, and the North End looked like a battlefield. In the hours that followed, Boston's first responders did something heroic. Cadets from the USS Nantucket, a naval training ship nearby, rushed to the scene. They dove into the muck, cutting victims free and dragging bodies from the debris. Police, soldiers, and Red Cross workers joined in. They fought exhaustion, cold, and the impossible stickiness that clung to everything. It took days to recover all the victims. Some weren't found for weeks, and the cleanup, it was a nightmare. Crews used seawater from fireboats to wash the streets, shoveled sand, and blasted walls for weeks. Even then, molasses seeped into every crack. Basements, sidewalks, sewers. Boston Harbor turned brown for months. For decades afterward, locals swore that on hot summer days they could still smell molasses in the air. At first, the U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company blamed anarchists, claiming a bomb had gone off. It was 1919, a time of labor unrest and warfare. But investigators soon realized the truth was simpler and worse. The tank was a disaster waiting to happen. Poorly designed, cheaply built, never tested. When engineers examined the wreckage, they found weak rivets and steel so brittle it could shatter with a hammer. Over 100 lawsuits were filed. The hearings dragged on for years, the longest civil case in Massachusetts history at the time. Eventually, the company was found liable. They paid out nearly $630,000 in damages, about $10 million today. Each life lost was valued at around $7,000, a horrifyingly small sum. But from tragedy came change. The disaster led to stronger building codes, stricter inspections, and the requirement that licensed engineers approve major construction projects. It was one of the first times in U.S. history that a corporation was held legally responsible for negligence. Modern structural engineering, with its testing standards and safety oversight, traces part of its roots back to that tank. What makes this story haunting isn't just the weirdness of it, it's that it was completely preventable. People noticed the leaks, heard the groans, but the company painted over the stains, ignored the warnings, and hoped for the best. It wasn't an act of God. It wasn't sabotage. It was human arrogance disguised as efficiency. A century later, Boston's North End is peaceful. A park stands where the tank once loomed. Langham Park, with a small plaque marking the spot. The metal from the tank still lies buried beneath the grass. When you walk there, you never know what happened. So next time you hear about the Great Molasses Flood, don't laugh it off. It wasn't sweet. It was tragic. And it changed industrial safety forever. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. What other strange historical events should we explore next? Thanks for watching, and remember, even the smallest leaks can bring down the biggest tanks.